so why should we support federalism at all or care about it? And sort of what is it? It's a constitutional structure. And I think a reason to take it very seriously is stated well by U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy in the 2011 decision in Vaughn versus the United States. So the founders, the framers of the Constitution, created America's system of federalism because they recognized that having the states on the one hand and the federal government on the other would enhance freedom. Individuals situated as they are around the country do not, as Justice Kennedy wrote, have to, quote, rely solely upon the political processes that control a remote central power, close quote. Since we have a system of federalism, there is no single government with, quote, complete jurisdiction over all the concerns of public life, close quote. So by having a system of federalism, we guard the freedom of the individual and protect the individual from exercises of arbitrary power. So Justice Kennedy wrote that the existence of the states and their powers should not be simply viewed as an end in itself, quotes, but the allocation of powers as set forth in the Constitution, yes, it does set boundaries between the federal government and the states, and it provides a way for each of them to maintain their integrity. But just as importantly, having a system of federalism, quote, secures to citizens the liberties that derive from a diffusion of sovereign power, close quote. So by having this spread out and by having multiplicities of jurisdictions, people are able to do things differently in different places. They're able to innovate. They're able to flee from one jurisdiction to another if they find one jurisdiction oppressive, and they're able to have policies in place that better reflect the wishes of the voter in that area. So constitutional law specialist Michael Mcconnell, who's a former federal judge and now at Stanford University Law School, writes that in the modern scholarly literature and in the thought of the founders as well, the framers, they point to three basic advantages of the Federalist system. First, decentralized decision-making is better able to reflect the diversity of interests and preferences of individuals in different parts of the nation. Second, conferring decision-making authority at a level of government no higher than necessary will prevent mutually disadvantageous attempts by communities to take advantage of their neighbors. So it blocks certain kinds of pilfering and despoiling other people around you. And third, decentralization allows for innovation and competition in government. So these are, the scholar is repeating points that I've made. Now, federalism is not only the distinction and rivalry among the states and between the states and the federal government, but it's also among local governments within the states. So as economist Richard McKenzie writes, the founders sought to disperse power, quote, among many different and competing governments at the federal, state, and local levels, close quote. The insight of competitive federalism is that the 51 state school boards are better than a single federal executive branch office, and that 15,000 local school boards are better than either 51 state school boards or a single federal bureaucratic office. So thus, by creating competition among the states and among the localities, it's to the benefit of all the citizens in the country. Now, the progressives, in the progressive era, which is, around the time of Woodrow Wilson and during the New Deal, when Franklin Roosevelt was president, they turned all of this upside down. So as constitutional law specialist Michael Grieve writes, the distinctive innovative feature of the progressive and the New Deal eras was the conscious design and deployment of intergovernmental schemes to reduce and suppress competition among the states. The New Dealers' bugaboo was a race to the bottom, this phrase again. And the New Dealers saw all interstate competition as a race to the bottom, even though the evidence showed that this was not the case. So the progressive and New Deal judges and scholars interpreted the Constitution, reinterpreted it, to suppress political and economic competition and to expand the size of government at local, state, and federal levels. This not only enhanced the power of federal officials, state officials and their supportive interest groups, and this is why this whole thing with the National Governors Association and the school chiefs plays into this, were enhanced and they were cut in on the deal as well. In the words of Michael Grieve, the organizing principle of progressive New Deal Constitution is the opposite of competition, namely cartels at every level. Such cartels were not only economic cartels, such as those fostered by the Agricultural Adjustment Act and the National Industrial Recovery Act, but also collusion among the states and of the states with the federal government through grants and aid and conditional spending. So this is the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, and this is Common Core, okay? So whenever they could, Grieve writes, progressives and New Dealers established intergovernmental or industrial cartels. So the critics, of course, opposed this, and I want to just add one last thought before I go on to student privacy, and that is something about school boards and school districts. So why should we have this differentiated form of local control of school districts and sanitation districts and water boards and so forth? We could just have counties and cities, all right? So here's why from a political scientist standpoint. Why have special districts? Special single-function districts, like school districts, allow for specialization and an unbundling of government activities. In other words, you, the citizen, can get something closer to what you want. This insight about special district is supported by social science. As political science Gordon Tullock suggests, he's one of the key founders in the public choice subdiscipline of political science, it is a mistake to think that all functions undertaken by government in a given geographical area ought necessarily to be run by the same unit. We are probably better off with each person being a member of 5 or 8 separate government units that overlap, and we're part of them. So we live in a city and we live in a county, but we also live in a water district and a waste management district and so forth. And this allows voters to designate more specifically who they want performing what function and in what way. All right, so these are the reasons why we want federalism: liberty, closeness to government, innovation, and effectiveness. So now let me just say a little bit about another part of the panel. I'm going to be brief on this because there's specialists on this that are also on the panel. So when I was in the federal government in the Secretary of Education's office, Department of Education, and I was the Assistant Secretary for Policy, we had under us the Student Privacy Office. And we revamped the rules, the regulations, for how this was to be administered because the Buckley Amendment, this law, the FERPA law, was put in by James Buckley, the brother of William Buckley, when he was U.S. Senator from New York. And so it was meant to protect student privacy, but some people are going to be looking at the data, right? The educational people in that local area. And it said, there had to be an authorized representative, and it said what's an educational program and what is directory information. This is things like address and parent's name and stuff like that. But the Obama administration, because it favors this labor force, this workforce planning that was talked about very eloquently by my colleague on the last panel, they decided they want to reinterpret this so they can do workforce planning. So they changed the definitions of authorized representative, educational program, and so forth, and they took away the affirmative legal duties of state and local educational authorities to protect private student data. And they ignored, indeed they flipped upside down the whole point of the thing, And so they designating non-government actors as authorized representatives. They did unauthorized, unlawful subdelegation of their authority. And so all of these things have allowed the big data and the data mining to get out of hand, and we're going to be other people that talk about this, but I just wanted to handle the legal side of it and say that they have done a radical reinterpretation of this law.